Hello, my name is Yvonne Blomer. I'm one of the board members for Victoria Festival of Authors. Welcome to Climate Acts, Land Sings, featuring authors Tawahum Bige, Alessandra Naccarato, and Julie Sze. Though this is a virtual event, Victoria Festival of Authors is located on the traditional ancestral territories of the Lekwungen people, also known as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. We acknowledge the ancestors, hereditary leaders, and matriarchs, as well as the creators from these lands, and give thanks for the privilege of living and working here. We are committed to serving as learners and listeners. Thank you to our sponsors, the BC Arts Council, Canada Council for the Arts, the CRD, the City of Victoria, Access Copyright, the Victoria Foundation, and Monroe's Books. Thanks also to the League of Canadian Poets, who has sponsored Alessandra's appearance at our festival. This event, as all VFA events, offers closed captioning. Please click the double C at the bottom of your screen to view captions. Please use the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen if you have questions for us or for the authors during the event. The moderator will be able to get to some of these questions near the end of the panel. This panel is moderated by Rita Wong. Rita Wong lives and works on unceded Coast Salish territories, also known as Vancouver. Dedicated to questions of water justice, decolonization, ecology, and climate justice, she has written several books of poetry, as well as co-edited the anthology, Downstream, Reimagining Water. Please welcome Rita Wong.
Thank you, Yvonne, for introducing me. And today, it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. Yeah, I'm very excited for this session today. We've got a stellar a group of writers, and I'll just start off with introductions, biographies, and say what a pleasure it was to read their latest books. Tawahum Bige is a Lutsuke Dene, a Plains Cree poet living on unceded Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territory. And their Scorpio Moon-ass poems expose growth, resistance, and persistence as a hopeless, two-spirit, non-binary, sad boy on an occupied turtle island. Bige has a BA in creative writing from Kwantlen Polytechnic University, and I just recently attended the launch of Cut to Fortress, their debut poetry collection, which was a really moving event. It brought together so many peeps in the community, and just is such a joy to listen to and hear. I also know Tawahum through our land protection work against the Trans Mountain Pipeline, which has led both of us at different times to face incarceration. And that's not the focus of today, but it's certainly, I think, a side note to the question of how do we heal the land. When we do these land acknowledgements, it's not just a token gesture. It puts us on a path to learn and uphold Indigenous laws, and Indigenous laws that are connected very strongly to natural laws. So this question of how do we heal the harm inflicted by colonization that manifests in so many ways, including the climate crisis that we're going to be talking about today. So Alessandra Naccarato is the author of Imminent Domains, Reckoning with the Anthropocene. And I just recently finished reading this book of essays and is super excited to dig into it. She's also the author of Reorigin of Species. Born and raised in Takaranto or Toronto, she's the recipient of the RBC Bronwyn Wallace Award and the CBC Poetry Prize. She holds an MFA in creative writing from UBC and a graduate degree in community economic development from Concordia University, supporting 2 decades of work and research in grassroots social change, community arts, and the prevention of gender-based violence. Her debut poetry collection, Reorigin of Species, was awarded the AICW Bersani Literary Prize for Poetry, and also named a Best Book of 2019 by CBC Books. And last but certainly not least, Julie Sze is a professor of American Studies at UC Davis. She's written 3 books, most recently Environmental Justice in a Moment of Danger, which delves into some recent examples of mobilization and movements that offer cautious and I would say necessary hope and decisive action in the face of social injustice and the destruction of the environment. She edited the book Sustainability and Social Justice, which came out with NYU Press in 2018, and has written over 60 articles and book chapters. She collaborates with environmental scientists, engineers, social scientists, and community-based organizers in California and New York. So we're in for a real treat to hear from all three of them. And we're going to start this session with short readings from each of the three authors. And then we'll get into a Q&A. So for folks who are listening, feel free to pop your questions in the Q&A. If we don't get into them right away, we'll get into them eventually. Yeah, maybe I will turn things over to Tawahum.
Tanse Tawahum Bige Nitsika-san Seze Tawahum Bige Suyi. My name's Tawahum, and I've got a couple of little poems for you. This first one is in my book, Cut to Fortress, and it's called Inner City Owl. And one of the little poetic tricks is to just write about real things. There's a real Vancouver downtown owl that this is about, so please enjoy. Talons deep in the gnarled branch of new growth over concrete causeways, this bird don't give a hoot. BMWs, Ford F-350s, and ugly Porsche Cayennes rush under claw. Inner city owl marks them all, beware. Hoot, hoot. She unlatches branch, opens wings, and as true as moonlight still shines despite light pollution, this owl does defecate on the most bougie cars. Wide-eyed, she twists her neck for a chittering squirrel, a relic of that pristine mountainscape her ancestors used to hunt through. Lush, verdant, mile-spanning green of cedar, blanket ceremony of land upon land. Inner city owl in the outer wilderness. Fresh air, head tilts up to breathe in. She arches and dives, wide eyes narrow, her beak breaks squirrel flesh, and she feasts. Moonlight dims. Concrete fades back into view. Talons deep in squirrel guts and neck twisting to the beat of car honks, sirens, and the clip-clop of stilettos from a red-dressed drunken mess, and her entourage of well-suited men, obnoxious, vying masculine. The bird hoots, marking them all for an accident early next week. Taking off, inner city owl's gray feathers fly as she makes her ascent like a moth to the moon, unreachable. The wind screeches into her mouth, rinsing out the taste of squirrel and exhaust. Masi Cho. Yeah, I remember seeing that little owl when I walked around near the BC courts, and like late at night, and I was just like, that's interesting. And then there were all these Daily Hive articles about this inner city owl, like hunting for prey, like in the middle of traffic, like in the middle of like cars rushing by, finds that like little rat in the middle of the street. Like there's some stellar images of that. And so yeah, that's that poem. And this one's more recent work. It's not for my book, but it's going to be on a music album, that like a hip hop poetry album that I've been working on about my experiences with court and jail and all that fun stuff, dealing with land protection work. So this is called Omnicolor Crescent / Monochrome Presence. And it goes like this. Outside is a bit of rainbow in a blue sky, but I see in monochrome. Nothing poetic about a courtroom. This ancient black and white reel depicts smoldering reservations and smallpox epidemics. And in the light of molten embers dripping off their crucifix, the powerful sit around a roulette table gambling lives of the ritually disempowered. Spent a week just fucking trapped in a little glass box while they spoke for me and talked about me as though I was the ghost of a disappeared people. And it wasn't until I was called as a witness to speak for myself that color became visible again. My eyes became visible again, that bit of rainbow in the sky, but I can't do this alone. Been baited for years to sign blood red on funding applications, begging on the phone for the approval to get my degree. I participated in boardroom banter, which means I wagered my token identity officially, orange shirt enduring boring racist railroading, polite and sanitary clothing. But listen, I won't let the system swallow me. I won't let the system swallow me. Though sometimes there is a hook in my cheek, a line stringing up, a sinker caught in my throat, belly yellow from gagging on their black pen paperwork. Witness their contracts signed to usurp with an unending killing season, attempted eradications of Indigenous people, and we are forced until our faces turn green to stomach the courts, signing the orders, making status quo excuses for the carnage, speaking in mind-closed absolutes. They say then was a different time, that we were killing each other already, and now we are the government's wards. See, we never had modern medicine until disease warfare was designed for us. What would we do without your addictions to opioids and Game of Thrones and gratifications? Indian reserves become the model for Nazi concentration camps. We witnessed them become the model for ICE camps. Not that different from salmon farms. While serial killers and mass shooters are labeled lone wolf deviants, despite working blue forces and worshiping in churches, designed to make the women go missing and murdered. Then they manufacture our own consent so hard, we too busy paying rent to settler landlords on ancestors' land. We don't stop to see the sky we stand under together until push has already shoved us into the gravel, until fentanyl epidemics annihilate populations, explain it away as poverty and our own doing. Do we dirty our own water? Embezzle money we never had use for before contact? So they call me contemptuous, but I'm an indigo student of prudence, a hallucination brought on to sink this fishing ship with these words writ. In a paper-stacked apocalypse, this is what I come to grips with, the increasing distance measured out between us and urban districts, housing crisis and work stress. But if I did it for the dollar, I wouldn't be a poet. I would make a profit. I'd exploit loopholes through submitted form and an envelope fold. Remember, Tawahum, violent revolutions don't ask for permission, but there's no notary for forging a destiny. But boy, it's easy to get busy here, signing away my identity. What monochrome paper contract did they have to make? And which rainbow sacred contract did they have to break to produce a single colored empire? We rewrite the agreements in an omnicolor crescent. Rewrite the agreements in an omnicolor crescent. I wake in their cell, heart open, free as I have ever been. Masicho, hi.
Thank you, Tawahum, Masicho. That was really powerful, that, the spirit and this ancestors can't be incarcerated by these violent systems. I'm going to invite Alessandra to share next.
Hello. So I'm going to share just the beginning of one of the essays from Imminent Domains. I write a lot about pollinators and the bees. It's a real through line in my first book, and in this book there are 3 essays looking at different aspects. One that really looks at what some people call the pollen industrial complex because of how complicated and problematic the story of the bees is right now. One that is interviews with beekeepers in the downtown east side in Vancouver. And I'm going to read from The Sting, which is more about my own journey with the bees. And I guess the through line through all of these is really the contemplation of the deeply wound interdependence that I've found with them, at least. So this is called The Sting. 1. When the bee stings me in the heart, I'm entering a cafe on Commercial Drive. It's a warm, bright day, even though it's September. The windows of the cafe are open and everyone seems to be laughing as they wait for the poetry reading to start. Everyone, including one of my exes, the one who ghosted me last spring, who is leaning on the bar, looking tanned and happy from touring their bike up the coast all summer. They shrug when they see me enter the room, shrug with their hands in their pocket and smile. And I smile back like I haven't begun to drift out of my body, helium-like, to avoid this. Hi, we both say. Hi, so good to see you. Then we go in for a hug, and that's when it happens. The bee that has flown down my dress is pressed between us. The stinger barbs into my skin, seems to go right into my sternum. Fuck, 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 I shout against their body, jerking away, tearing at my dress. What, they say startled. A fucking bee, I say. A wild bee. It falls from my dress to the sticky cafe floor, dying. They rush to the bar to get ice. The sting keeps rising, burning brighter. Shock, epinephrine. I can feel my body preparing for flight. They return with a pint of ice cubes already melting in the heat. Look me right in the eyes like time has turned back to spring. Are you okay? They ask. The ice is cold in my hand. It sticks to my skin as I shove it down my dress, press it between my breasts. I hold it there, dripping wet, cold and painful against the hot sting. I can still see the bee dying on the floor. Nature doesn't lie, but I do. It's getting better already, I say. 2. Alone in my one-bedroom apartment in East Vancouver, I've been rolling organic tobacco and drinking enough coffee to stain my teeth. I've been setting time limits for when I can begin watching TV, 5 p.m., no 3 p.m., and then breaking them. I've been considering how I dealt with isolation as a teenager and my proximity to downtown. Maybe I should get a cat, I've been thinking, but it seems pretty clear I can't take care of anything. Not the dishes long sitting in the sink, not the eroding soles of my cowboy boots, not my sublet apartment. I don't even have a lease. Give me something, I've been praying at life. Give me some way to go on. And then the bee flies down my dress. The stinger goes right into my heart, like a stiletto knife, like it is 10,000 times what it is. The ice drips down my dress, the bee is there on the floor dying, and I have been so lonely. I have been so alone. I've been hiding it in these dresses. That's the art of femme. You are so beautiful, everyone says, while you lie in a bathtub that could be the bottom of a river. The stinger, it goes so deep, it's blood deep, love deep. I'm totally fine, I say, as the ex walks away and the sting continues rising, burning, rising. I lift the bee from the filthy floor. I carry it with me to the bathroom where I look into the mirror and study the place where our bodies have become one. I can't see the stinger, but I know it's there, making its way towards grief. So you died for this, I ask, and silence answers. Elsewhere, the hive goes on, recreating itself. But here, the sacrifice says my name. It says my name only. How special you are, it tells me. To be a body a bee can sting. To be living. I place the carapace in toilet paper into my purse. I wash my hands. To be living. I wash my face. To be living. And it echoes what the bee has told me. It echoes, it thrums, it doesn't stop burning. 1, I hear when I'm falling asleep. 1, 2, 3, and when I sit at my desk. 5, 8, 13, 21. I hear the Fibonacci sequence, the meter of the golden ratio, and it's like synesthesia. like my senses mix. I hear the number, I see light, I see wings, I see gold. I write the number in lipstick on my mirror, the way other people write, I love you. 1.618. You aren't alone, I say to myself, to my reflection in my empty apartment. You are part of everything. 3. What do you call a beekeeper who has no bees? A beekeeper, the future, both. Like a mother, like a widow, like a miscarriage. Loss doesn't unmake who we are. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alessandra. That's a powerful line to end the reading with. Loss doesn't unmake who we are. Thank you. Julie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. I am not a poet or a particularly creative person, but I will read the first paragraph of my book from the introduction and then switch to more the genre that I'm comfortable with, which is kind of talking through the book. So the introduction to my book is called Environmental Justice at the Crossroads of Danger and Freedom. And it opens with a song, which I would love to play, but we don't have time to play it. Stevie Wonder's 1975 song Saturn from the epic Songs from the Key of Life offers a lyrical utopia. He penned the song as an ode to his birthplace, Saginaw in Michigan, which his collaborator misheard as Saturn. The song is a loving testament to where Stevie Wonder came from and where he wants to go, a vision of a future world much better than the world we inhabit. Unclean air, violence, war, and consumerism are wrapped up in this song into an extraterrestrial longing. 4 decades later, Wonder's lyrical call is more urgent and ever distant. In a nation and in a world where rapacious corporate capitalism is plundering natural resources and oil and gas interests fund climate change denial and direct what passes for environmental policy, a world that Stevie Wonder imagines with clean air, without war, and rampant consumerism and extractive capitalism seems nearly impossible to imagine. But it is precisely now that imagination and action become essential. So I wrote environmental justice in a moment of danger because I have been working with and in environmental justice movements, and I want to support and think about the movements because there's nothing else than what than that. Crises we understand are connected, whether that's police, state section, violence, pandemic, public health, and climate crises. And it's apparent more to those around the world who protest against fascists and extreme economic and social inequality made much, much worse under COVID and climate change. These crises have come home in the shape of hurricanes, heat waves, and wildfires, and the old political order is crumbling. But what takes place is now under fierce struggle. And the action is on the streets, in the classrooms, and in the stories and songs that are shaped by government chambers, corporate boardrooms, and people in the streets. It is difficult to hold such a non-naive, radical hope in the arc of history, bending towards justice. But how hard and how necessary it is to speak of freedom or to imagine a future in the face of these massive crises of health, environment, and democracy. I wrote this book because I have been trying to foreground the stories and working with environmental injustice, climate justice activists who have done what they always have done for the past 3 decades. Or we could argue the timeline is much longer than 3 decades. They tell different stories of a future and one that we need to imagine. I don't have time. I wanted to respect everybody else's time, but the end of the introduction ends with Langston Hughes' poem, Kids Who Die, which got a lot of circulation when Trayvon Martin was murdered by the police. And so let me just close out with the end of that chapter and the discussion of that poem and why I think that this matters so much. I think the poems and the songs of people like Langston Hughes and Stevie Wonder are important because we need to cultivate this idea, of a non-naive politics of radical hope, and culture and storytelling are key components of that. Our triumph is survival, the choices we make, and the stories we tell. So environmental justice in a moment of danger honors the work and of the activists who have and continue to be in the struggle, because telling these stories keeps our spirit up through the sharing of stories, songs, credit, and support. And the proceeds for this book go entirely to movement organizations. So the book is dedicated to the environmental justice activists and believers. May our ranks grow, who sing, breathe, dance, and march in our collective search to make the world not Flint, Michigan, but Stevie Wonder's Saturn. So I'll end it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Yeah, that was super interesting history. And I think Saginaw is still there. And what it would take to heal that our relationship or people's relationship with that, I think, is something we might get into. Thank you, all three of you, for sharing a glimpse into your powerful work. I'm just switching to gallery view so I can see all of you. And maybe I'll start just by saying, Tawahum, the reading was so powerful, it bumped me out of the Zoom room. I got kicked out and had to come back in. So it was a bit discombobulating. But I was wondering if the three of you could maybe share with us the process of writing your latest book, how it unfolded for you, and whether there are particular moments that stood out for you in that process, especially since our panel is about thinking through climate at this moment. And climate's not anything new. Like, as I think all four of us understand, you know, the so-called climate crisis has been in the making for hundreds and hundreds of years, through colonization, imperialism, and, you know, massive disruption of the land and people. But, you know, I think, and I understand from all of your work, that it's not the time to give up. And, you know, the question of what do we do right now is something that's, you know, constantly on my mind. So maybe how does that sort of context connect to the process of writing the book? Is it something that was foregrounded in you as you were writing? Was it something you had to put in the background so that you could focus? Like, just curious about people's different strategies of coping with these moments the times that we're living through, I guess, is kind of what I wanted to open it up with. So does anybody want to start?
I can start for sure. Cut to Fortress. I had been writing that since 2017. It's really a collection of poems I wrote between 2017 2018 while I was in my studies in creative writing. And not to kind of disenchant anyone from that process, really I saw a call for submissions from a different publisher than I ended up going with. And one Saturday evening, I just started collecting all the poems that I had been writing and seeing if there was a line through them all. And a lot of it was just like my lived experience growing up, wanting to heal that, as well as like what that lived experience has given me in terms of a worldview. When I first started getting into poetry and creative writing, the urgency of what was going on to the land around us was like, I think I really came up in the 2016 end of the Standing Rock movement, and I wrote a ton about that because I was just seeing, like, I was glued to the screen watching all that violence unfold, and then more as I was learning about what was going on just right around me. It was just so present. I couldn't help but like add a lens to that throughout the poems I wrote in those couple of years. Yeah, I see it connected in my experiences in doing frontline work. The obviousness between a lot of our lived traumas connects to resource extraction almost like entirely. Like the reason an entire continent was colonized was for resource extraction. Like And so like the deviousness of like some of those trauma machines, whether you're a settler, you're indigenous, whether your culture has been colonized elsewhere, is that reasoning is there. And I wanted that to come through in my book. There's especially a poem called Too Abstract, where I talk about my own lived experience and I compare it to forests being knocked down, like rivers being poisoned, like these things. It's not like the traumas we endure. It's not simply like it is cruelty, but it is not simply cruelty to be cruel. It's cruelty to obtain. And I'd say that is like the undercurrent of what inspired that book for sure, and all the poems in those couple of years that I was deeply writing about it.
For me, I've been working on environmental justice since 1991, when the Principles of Environmental Justice came out. And so it's been interesting to watch the changing understanding of the arguments that environmental justice activists have been making, and environmental justice activists have been saying the same thing for however long you want to say it, 30 years, 500 years, what have you. So I wrote this book in part because there is more understanding by more people about the arguments that environmental justice activists have been making for a very long time. And in 1991, pre-GIS, pre-internet, the arguments were really, really different. You had to still kind of convince people empirically, that these things were real, that environmental inequality and health inequality and racial inequality was real. And I'm old enough to remember those debates. And so I wrote this book in part because I see changes in more people understanding and believing and being committed and connected to the arguments that justice activists make. So there is a different audience and reality. So Standing Rock, my book is a very short readable book, in part because more people know about these struggles, but also it's kind of easy to forget because there's this way in which there's this everybody knows about Standing Rock and then it kind of falls off social media if you're not deeply in the movement, you know what I mean? And so part of why I wanted to write this book was to connect the different struggles and movements in the book. So first, every chapter, it's a very short book, has a campaign, a network, and a sort of set of keywords. So Standing Rock, and Keystone and Indigenous Environmental Network, extractive, settler colonialism, extractive, extraction, gender, violence, etc. The second chapter is on neoliberalism and privatization and looks at Flint and the Central Valley and water justice. And the third chapter looks at Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Maria, climate justice, and the one that's most focused on sort of climate justice cultures and the idea of non-naive radical hope. Well, if you look at those chapters as separate from each other, that's just not the reality, right? Because the activists in Flint were going to Standing Rock, and those folks are connected to people who have been, talking in responding to Hurricane Maria, who are always connected to folks in New Orleans and Hurricane Katrina. So if you think about these things separately, that's not what really the social movements are like, right? And so what I wanted to do was write a short book that kind of honors the connections that folks were already making on the ground, but also there was so much history and so much, being written about all of those things. And so to kind of write a synthesis, in other words, that could also translate academic language around settler colonialism and racial capitalism to a broader kind of audience. So my audience, for me, the audience and who's going to read it was everything. I wrote this book for that purpose, not for my parents to read because my parents are immigrants and actually they're dead anyway, so they wouldn't read the book, but other people who are, maybe have a parent that's kind of interested in this issue, what would be a good kind of primer for that? Do you know what I mean? And to have because there's more availability and curiosity and commitment, to these issues, that is certainly different than it was in 1991, where the activists were very like, committed, equally committed, but the audience wasn't there, and that's a lot of different things. Part of it is because the systems of exploitation and power and, corporate and economic, authoritarianism and fascism are so horrendous. Do you know what I mean? So more people understand like, oh shit, this isn't like the 90s neoliberal argument, like everything's going to be fine. More people are freaked out by all this stuff. Do you know what I mean? So it's not like people know about it because things are better. People know about these issues because things are worse. Do you know what I mean? But you still also have to have a narrative that doesn't just make you feel like it's just pointless and, the powers that be are going to maintain power. You know what I mean? Things do change. All the folks that came out for, in George Floyd in the US and, against police violence and people who convened, at Standing Rock, and people who, more people understand, about hurricanes and, how they hit unequally. I mean, that's a huge shift. So the book is both, tries to be kind of a basic explainer, in a way that doesn't sort of simplify it. So yeah, the audience really mattered and the context really mattered in the writing for me.
Yeah, that's great.
Just add a little bit. I mean, I set out to write a book about the interconnection of illness and climate change in 2019. So, coming from my own experience navigating Lyme disease and contemplating interdependence and just where that story of environmental change in climate change is really one that like within the body, that's not like a story out there, it's also a story between us and within us, and from a place of just having been bedbound for years, and experiencing a lot of gaslighting around it, the same way we talk about, the same way climate change is often talked about. And like, as I set out to contemplate these things, our world, COVID happened, right? Our world changed fundamentally. This became like the foremost thing. And so the book was really shaped by that, by sitting in deeper and deeper contemplation and witnessing and experiencing drastic change all around us. I'd already named it Imminent Domains, thinking about imminent change, and this speed at which like everything changed was really heart-wrenching. And I mean, it's hard to even give words to it. And I'm sitting here right now actually like quite ill with COVID-19 and isolating. And so just putting on some femme makeup and making it work. But really at the heart, I wanted to write a book that was deeply personal, because I was thinking through intimacy with the kind of larger context we're in, and hoping to do that as an offering or way to navigate, like each of us, I think, has to find our own way to navigate and think about and turn towards what we're facing. And that involves a lot of grief. It involves a lot, something different for each of us. But I wanted to make that offering that way. And it's been a big journey. It really, there was an idea of what the book was, and then it was really written, majority of it, and came to life during the past 2 years. So it's been a powerful journey, to say the least. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Alessandra, and thank you for taking the time to be with us when you're feeling ill. Really appreciate that. You say in your book, and I'm just going to quote this, that Lyme disease likely reflects ecological change rather than bacterium evolution. and that people fell sick not with a new disease, but with a new relationship. And fell sick with the trophic impact of their own settler colonialism, I think is what you say. And yeah, making that connection between the pandemic and the loss of habitat and natural spaces, I think is something that needs to happen more. So I appreciate you making those kinds of connections. And thinking about, what you say, where we meet disease, we meet the world. And there was that lovely moment where I think you write, well, lovely, it's sad, but it's also really moving, that you reach a hand towards nature and it reaches back, offering an intimacy through illness we never expected and never wanted to find. But here we are, right? And there's something about how it can hit any of us at any time, both illness and disability, but also climate disaster, hurricanes, heat waves, forest fires, floods, like you name it. All of this is happening faster and faster, right? And it really, I think what you're saying, Julie, about like non-naive radical hope is really important in these times. And not just honoring, but also maybe reiterating and strengthening those relationships that help people get through these times, but also posit a narrative, and not just a narrative, but a plan, like an action plan to live in a better way, right? That is still not impossible, and it's more necessary than ever. So, with that in mind, like, what are the stories that you find helpful to share in these times, right? In the face of all that we're up against. And some of that is in your books, but some of it may not be in your books. Like, I just sort of an open question. And, Tawahum, you mentioned, you're working on a new album. Like, is that part of the lens of how you're making new work? Or is it something that just, not everything comes in a sort of premeditated way. Like, we sometimes do whatever we feel we need to from our gut, and then afterwards we put a narrative on top of it. So, it's fine if that's not, what's going on. But I just wanted to open up that question of what are the stories we need in these times? Yeah. Or keep us going in that direction, I guess. Yeah. And sometimes there are little things, like just learning about how the bees work and mushrooms, and the owl. I really love that owl. Like, I spent a lot of time downtown, I never saw that owl. So I'm glad you saw it and you shared it. Like, those kinds of stories that remind us that humans aren't the end all and the be all, that we have a lot to learn from our the other beings on this planet as well, and maybe to put things into perspective for ourselves.
I wrote, can I share a screen quickly?
Sure.
Okay. I wrote about this piece here. I really love this, North Pole. I don't know if anybody's heard about this. It's from Movement Generation, which is a collective based out of Oakland that talks about creating new narratives around climate justice. And so what they did was create these kind of mini YouTube series that's actually a climate justice comedy. And I talk about it as an abolitionist climate justice narrative, and why we need abolitionist climate justice narratives. And there's a lot that works in this. I've shared it with my class because they're short, they're kind of funny. A lot of it is about linking gentrification and police violence and asthma and climate justice. And so the North Pole is like this one neighborhood that's very vulnerable, a black and brown neighborhood in Oakland, vulnerable to gentrification. And then the North, like linking the instability of their home with the polar bear in the North Pole. And so there's this like multi-species animal thing going on. What I think is really interesting about this film is that it really talks about, it uses humor, it's pretty funny, and it's very hip hop inflected. And so I would love to hear more about, the music you make. And, I've written a lot about climate justice satire, climate justice humor in hip hop, because if you just kind of follow social media, that's what people are doing. Young people are making the culture, and it's not in the narratives that are the old declension dystopian narratives around, Eden and the fall. Do you know what I mean? And so, like, it's not a surprise that, Dallas Goldtooth, who's the, is a comedian with the 1491s, and he's done interviews like, on podcasts where he talks about like how humor and culture is how like he makes shit, sense of the batshit craziness in the world. There is no separation between the humor and the horror, and that's what satire is. So if you just like open your eyes a little bit, and I'm not on TikTok, I don't really follow, a ton of stuff, but it's, even if you kind of a little bit follow youth culture and youth activism, they're the ones generating the culture and the narratives. Do you know what I mean? Just other people have to follow what's already happening.
Thank you. That's awesome. I think it's important to laugh and to cry. Like it's not an either or for me, it's both.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit. When it comes to like the laughter, I found like a lot of my humor comes out of the strangely dystopic. Uh, like yeah, it's like satirical, but it's also like pained laughter. Like the amount of times where I've made a joke and it's like it falls flat on most groups of people, but then once I'm around a bunch of climate activists, like they're all like, ha, like they have the same. It's like that kind of ha moment where it's like, ah, that hurts actually. Um, because it's just painfully true, and then there's no other way to describe it. But like there's a lot of those connections in I think my music. Um, you shine a light on all these things, and they seem a lot more ridiculous once you like start talking about them, throw a simile or a metaphor in there. Uh, I don't know, have a bump and beat behind it. No, but when I think about the stories that need to be shared, I have difficulty pushing my own agenda on anybody else. I really think that if you're deeply feeling and connected to the land, you'll write about it. Like and those who are writing like sad boy indie music that doesn't really seem to be speaking to anything that we're talking about around here is just as valuable and necessary. And like if I were speaking to youth, I wouldn't be like, you got to write about what I'm writing about. I'm like, I want you to feel free. I want your like the reason I write the way I do is to achieve some sense of personal freedom, um, some sense of personal healing, and that looks so different for everybody. And for me, it's like tied tightly to the land because like it's what I said about the inspiration of my book, Cut to Fortress, is that like I see these oppressive systems and where a lot of people are like, why does this even happen? I'm just like, it's very clear to me why this all happens the way it does, and it's healing for me to write about it from that perspective. When I went to jail, um, I was like, I think my main goal, and again, this is disenchanting some of the creative process, but like, I was like, the government put me in here. I'm going to make the government pay me to make art about this now, um, because that's how it's going to go. Like, that's how I know I'm going to heal through this. I know it's going to be through the writing. May as well make them pay doubly, because it's quite expensive for them to even just put you in jail to begin with. So that's where that came from. But I've always wanted to work with music, and it's just presented a beautiful opportunity for me to do that, to like couple all of it together, the healing, the dystopic, satirical situations, like the humor, the genuine love for the land around me, and like doing my best. Like I always see art as, in conclusion to this question, always see art as ceremony. And if I'm expressing my heart, my art, my love this way, I know the land around me, the spirits, the ancestors around me, they for lack of better language, they fuck with that. So yeah.
Thanks, Tawahum. Oh, I can maybe shift a little bit or not. Alessandra, can you hear me okay? You look frozen to me. Uh-oh. Well, we can come back to this in a little bit if we need to. But I want to maybe keep going with that question of land. Like Tawahum, you write at one point, "Where's the green inside me?" And you start your book off that way. And then towards the end, Cut to Fortress comes to, you know, the meaning of your name of North Star, and that sense of being guided by the stars, I guess, or by the ancestors, and that sense of rebuilding this world together. And I see that in your work in so many ways, like just the humor, the music, and the honesty. And there's something about, I think, truth telling in and of itself that hopefully is healing in ways that we don't always know how to explain or express in the moment, but we can see afterwards looking back. And I was thinking some more about Stevie Wonder, Julie, and just thinking about how, you know, had no idea of that history. And yet it was always there in his music. Like the writer Lee Maracle talks about how song is healing and song and dance are healing. And there's something about, I think, just when we're able to keep speaking our truths in whatever shape or forms or sounds they need to take, they're not always just words, right? And so just to kind of return to that sense of the land, whichever land we happen to be living on, and how that kind of connection is also really important in terms of it's I believe that I'm here because my ancestors had that connection to land, and I believe that down the road future generations also need to have that connection to land, and that connection, you know, has been really in many ways heavily damaged and severed through industrialization, colonization, consumerism. But at the end of the day, we're still walking on the land, we're still breathing the air, we're still drinking the water, no matter how processed or poisoned or, you know, challenging that is, in the example of Flint, for example. And yet somehow people keep going, that people are still here. And more people, as you're saying, than ever seem to understand that we're in a relationship where the land is what keeps us alive, right? And we have a reciprocal duty to give back. So I was just would like to invite you to just share maybe ways of giving back, either in your writing or in other forms, whatever kind of comes to mind. And Alessandra, we lost you for a little bit, so I don't know if you wanted to go back to that second question. We can go back if you like. I was just kind of talking and hoping that you would reappear. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I mentioned this briefly, but it's actually kind of important, which is, you know, I am not an artist or a creator, you know, per se. I'm a professor. And so I have a job. Do you know what I mean? And so when I said that I gave the royalties for this book back to the social movements, like that is a very literal, you know, like it feels extractive to write about social movements and not, you know, direct everything, you know, including material resources back into them. And so, and a lot of this, you know, I am a huge fan of Movement Generation, and they have this just transition framework where they talk about just transition is not just, you know, about oil, you know, it's about extraction of all forms, including labor, you know, and relationships to knowledge and knowledge production. And, you know, the just transition framework is really beautiful and helps me understand the work that I do. You know, so then I'm like, okay, well, you know, I can't also extract the ideas and write about movements and then like, you know, get, you know, career accolades for them. That's bullshit. Do you know what I mean? And so in a very concrete way, like you know, I have to direct those resources back. I support students. I do a lot of mentoring. You know, I do the things that I can do within like the constraints of my world and the work that I do. So that's what I try to do. You know, I'm a professor of American Studies, And, there's a lot now more understanding in, of what at a public land grant, university, which, the historical data has always been there, but like the ways it was understood through this land grab university, and how literally land grant universities and sort of the public mission in the US, they were funded by the theft and sale of native lands. And so, that I am a professor of American Studies on a land grant institution in the US. What does that mean? At the very minimal basis, I teach about that. I have to. Do you know what I mean? I have to start my class out with that. There's no other way to do what I do and not feel like disgusted about, who I am and the work that I do. So, I'm not saying this to like make myself feel, better or seem anything, but like, I think really you always have to direct it towards, what, not just like in the individualist level, but like the just transition framework always helps me sort of guide those kind of questions. Like, what is the work for? Who is it for? What can I do? What am I good at? What am I not good at? And then just work on those fronts. So that's, I don't know if that's too much detail or personal or
that's
something
great.
like that.
Yeah, that's super helpful. I wish I heard more academics talking like that. Yeah. And there are lots, I should say, but I'd like to hear more. Yeah. I don't know if this helps with the land question, but in some of your essays, Alessandra, you're talking about food and rabbits and just, having, I guess, a relationship to what we grow and what we eat. I think for many people, that's a very tangible way to enter into that conversation.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak a little bit about that. It's interesting because I grew up in downtown Toronto without a lot of access to nature and without the kind of family income that would allow us to leave the city. And so really part of writing this book, I've been thinking a lot about what it is to find these tiny pieces of nature, like the beautiful owl in your poem, the rabbits that are like just on my front yard, and the way my grandmother kept rabbits in her shed and tended her own meat that way. And yeah, one of the essays just speaks about me cooking a rabbit for the first time, and that being kind of this one way of engaging with her way of being that is so different from my way of being and my way of growing up and what I know of this world, and just that one custom, that one practice kind of being a bit of a homecoming to her, and the small ways that are possible. And it's something that I kind of carry with me and that I continue to think about, even when I'm, in my apartment right now, isolating, or when I am just in the city and, we don't always have access to nature. What does it mean to find that connection in the smallest ways? Yeah, so I guess that's what I think about that. I will say that beekeepers who work in the downtown east side, and there's a set of hives beside Insight that community members tend, and that was like meeting them and interviewing them was one example, or like just like blew my heart open about just how we can have these small moments of connection and practice and resilience. And those hives produce so much honey, like they did better than hives anywhere else. Yeah, so those are just some thoughts I have right now. Thanks.
Urban spaces are actually apparently a bit of a refuge for bees in some ways, and I was surprised to learn that too. Tawahum, I don't mean to like, I'm not meaning like a difficult question around the land, because I know like to get up north is not easy, and you write about that at one point in the book, right? That it's a long trip to try to visit. But I also know just from hearing you talk in other spaces that, you know, that sense of land, wherever you happen to be, like that you're thinking about the Indigenous peoples of that place and trying to support what they're doing. So, you know, there's kind of many ways to get at that question of land. But I land back with something that Leanne Simpson has talked about, which is, you know, urban spaces, harmed spaces, they're still part of the mother, the earth. And, you know, that's as much reason and maybe more reason to pay attention and to care for the land. So both, you know, those places that are far away up north or places that are still somewhat intact that we're trying to protect, but also the ones that are just, you know, trying to heal from all of this devastation too, like all of it. Yeah. I remember many years ago when we started doing land acknowledgements in Vancouver, I think it was like in the late 90s, and we were in the Heritage Hall, and somebody who was like a former ambassador to Canada, he didn't understand what we were doing with the acknowledgement. He thought we were talking about the building. He didn't understand that we were talking about the whole area of the land. And he was like, oh, I didn't know Coast Salish people own this building. And like, dude, they don't own the building, they own everything. Do you understand? And so to think in bigger ways, bigger scale, this is maybe going back to that just transition conversation, but you know, it's really important that we have individual ways of embodying and living and relating, but also that it feeds back into like a larger collective plan or a collective narrative, right? And I find the just transitions a helpful one. Like we've been out in front of RBCs, for instance, Royal Banks, telling customers to divest from Wet'suwet'en, or sorry, from CGL, the Coastal GasLink pipeline, which is trying to drill under Wet'suwet'en River right now, and trying to get RBC and other investors into these mega pipelines to stop, basically, and to not just stop, but to redirect those funds into a just transition, right? Into renewable, into food security, into a softer infrastructure that's less brittle and hopefully more resilient as we're going to face more and more upheaval. So yeah, just maybe to think about how Indigenous peoples have known this for hundreds, thousands of years, and you know, to come to this late, but hopefully not too late, in terms of, you know, thinking about how we're guided by the folks who've come before us. And so maybe that be my kind of next prompt or open invitation to think about, like, how did we end up in this room together today? Like, who have we been listening to or upholding or helping us on this path? If you want to think about ancestors or movement elders or friends or pets, you know, everybody matters in the sense of helping us, you know, be the best that we can. And I always say to my students about, you know, being the best you can, not in some sort of neoliberal individualist way, but in the way of being able to serve, you know, the larger community, because when we're healthy, we're able to contribute more. Yeah, so I liked that question you were saying, like, what do you like doing? What are you good at doing? What should you avoid doing? You know, all of those kinds of things. Yeah. Does anybody want to start on that?
Yeah, I can hop in a little bit. I miss Lee Miracle. I miss her dearly. She's a big reason why I'm around doing what I'm doing. And like back in 2016, she did this sold out show at the Queen Elizabeth Theater, doing like motivational speaking kind of a thing. I didn't go to that. It was sold out. The next day she did a poetry reading at UBC's bookstore with 16 people there. This is funny how that works. And I just loitered after, because I just really wanted a chance to like even exchange a couple sentences with her. And she just invited me to get coffee with her and sat down with me and was really kind to me, and gave me some tips about writing and just pushed me in the right direction. I got her to sign my copy of Celia's song. And then I started bumping into her all over the place, like random panels, we'd all get lunch together. She'd tell me all sorts of wild stories about Dene folks, even though she's not Dene herself. And I just felt so warmly included by Lee. And then like learning more and more about what she did as an Indigenous writer and an Indigenous activist to make it so that I can do what I do. Like I literally am able to be an Indigenous poet because Lee Miracle like hoofed it and like got a bunch of people in the downtown east side to sign that they would learn English to read her books like like 50 some odd years ago, you know? Like that's why I'm able to do what I do. And then that's where like I can tie it to the former question too, is like I just want to make sure that like at the end of the day more folks are able to do what they're able to do, because I just want to leave this place a little bit better than I left it. So that's like where I come to with that. But Lee Miracle really sticks out to me. All my ancestors, of course. And I also think it's so interesting because we've all got ancestors that led us here into this room today. And whether you're a settler or you're Indigenous, like there's something, you know, like I'm wondering, I'm so curious to what other people think about like, do you think there was like an ancestor who saw what was going on here? If you have a couple generations that have been here, if you had like an ancestor who's like, oh, that's kind of whack. And like, is that what's in ya? Or like what was the change like? Because I know lots of settlers here, they must not have been with it, or like maybe they just wanted to be on a farm somewhere and not think about what was going on around the land around them. I mean, that's present today, but that's sort of my little additional offering if anyone wants to speak to it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I was there are a lot of the folks I worked with in the environmental justice movement have passed. But you know, Neelak Butler was an important woman, Indigenous, one of the founders in Indigenous Environmental Network. Some of the activists I worked with, you know, their own children had died of asthma, you know, and so and then now I'm of the age where the people who are slightly older than me are starting to pass, some of them because they were exposed to pesticides or, you know, all other kinds of violences, environmentally and otherwise. And so, you know, and when I was saying that my parents are dead, you know, my mom died a month ago. And so it's all very fresh. And I was thinking about it because I think that there's a fear of death in a lot of dominant cultures that doesn't think of thinks of death in like in a horrific, like there's just nothing for. My mom was a Buddhist, and so for her, believing in a transition and, you know, you leave your physical form but there's energy, you know, was a really powerful thing that made it a kind of beautiful transition. Do you know what I mean? And so there's a way in which like we don't talk about beautiful deaths as being part of this cycle. And so it was very, I think, you know, we don't thank you, you know, for that, for what, you know, your words too, because I've been thinking a lot about this recently, you know, and why there is such a desire to like, you know, buy stuff or get more or be more powerful or, you know what I mean? And it's a lot of this is yes, it's policy, but, you know, it's also just the worldviews that you grow up with and that you honor or that you learn from. You know, I mean, my mom's, you know, passing was beautiful, but like in a broader culture, and it meant a lot in the community context in which we came from. Do you know what I mean? Collaborative, people were sharing in, everybody shares to, you know, their funeral expenses because they understand everybody's going to pass. And so you're building the community through the death as well. And so, you know, thinking a lot about what that means. And these are not well-developed thoughts. You know, obviously this just happened like, you know, a month ago, but it was, you know, part of, it was beautiful. And there isn't a lot of ways in a lot of like popular culture or in dominant, you know, narratives around beautiful deaths and about the sort of connectivity. And, you know, reading about during Standing Rock, you know, when LaDonna Allard said, you know, these are our homes. You know, this is not like a resource to be extracted and used. You know, these are our people's, you know, you don't dig up the graves, of your ancestors. Do you know what I mean? What does it mean? Like, these aren't just like cliches, like to honor the earth and to think about, generations, and this kind of sense of time and that capaciousness. It's really profound and beautiful. And it's something that I think that a lot of people do understand and live, but like the dominant economic and political structure is like denies all of that, and it's very masculinist and it's heteronormative and it's white supremacist and all those kinds of things, but a lot of it I think is rooted, again, this is just my opinion, I don't research this, about fear. A lot of this is about fear and about death and fear of death. And so I think, there's something where life and death and cycles and, connectiveness are what the world is actually for, how it's set up. And it's everything else that has made it be something not beautiful, or tries to deny those things. Anyway, I'll stop talking now because now I think I make no sense at all. So thank you.
Oh, no, you made a lot of sense. Thank you, Julie. I was just asked by a friend today to be an executor on her will, and we're thinking about, planning for death so that it could happen in a beautiful way. Yeah. And I'm sorry that your loss was so recent. I think it takes time. Alessandra, do you want to weigh in, or do you need to rest? I hope we're not tiring you out too much.
No, it's a beautiful conversation to be part of. And this last piece is reminding me, a lot of my spiritual practice has a lot to do with ancestral practice and really connecting to, what my Italian ancestors would have practiced in ways to not be practicing someone else's practices, but really connecting to what is real and true for the people I came from. And but I'm drawn into the memory, or just thinking about how every Samhain, the end of October, Halloween, whatever we call it, that every year we have this practice of really coming together to honor and celebrate death as a community, and all of these practices for doing it. And I have all of these teachers and mentors and crones who teach me how to do that. And this is something we do every year. And there's something just deeply powerful about it that I reflect on all the time, that I'm being initiated into this practice of community mourning, community grief, community rituals of death from the time I'm in my 30s. And it does feel like that working is so connected to everything we're talking about, of how we, reclaim understandings and ritual that bring us, towards where we are, and in relationship with this really crucial reality of death, because it's part of this bigger conversation we're having, right, around climate, that requires us turning towards. So it's beautiful just to be part of this conversation. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. We're going to wrap up pretty soon. I wanted to just maybe draw back on that, some of the things that have come up around interdependency. I hear it in all three of you in different ways. And love. And love's a hard word because it gets overused and is cliche, but I think we still have to affirm it and practice it. And so thank you, all three of you, for engaging in this conversation around what for me is about collective care and love and respect, and hopefully intergenerational continuity as well. I think the earth is going to be fine with or without us. I would like our descendants and communities to be worthy of sticking around on this planet. And so I think we need to keep having these kinds of conversations, sharing these kinds of stories, and hopefully helping people who are in difficult situations see that there is hope, and that it is real hope. It is non-naive. It is work. Hope is a verb with its sleeves rolled up, as some would say. But it's also play and joy and song. And yeah, I also just wanted to say thank you, Tawahum, for sharing some of those memories of Lee. She also put me on the path that I'm on today and has moved so many of us. So maybe just to close this is a thank you for all of you, and in honor of the memory of Lee and the work that she continues to do through us and through many of the people that she's influenced. Thank you, everybody. Are we going to get booted off now? How does this work?
Thank you so much, all of you, for this wonderful panel. I love ending on collective care and hope and non-naive hope. So thanks to all of you. Thanks especially to our moderator, Rita Wong, Tawahum Bige, Alessandra Naccarato, and Julie Sze. If you're interested in purchasing any of the books from today's authors, please support Monroe's books. You can visit them online or in person to purchase these books and other books featured during the festival. This is the last day of the Victoria Festival of Arts, but tonight we have an event with Bob McDonald, host of Quirks and Quarks, will be a day at Dave Dunnett Theatre in Victoria to talk about his new book, The Future is Now, Solving the Climate Crisis with Today's Technologies. Please visit our website for more information. Our website also features question and answers with all the authors participating at VFA 2022 and a place for you to sign up to our newsletter. If you would like to support the festival in any other ways, please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also make a tax-deductible donation to Victoria Festival of Authors through our website or on VFA's page at Canada Helps. Your donations help to keep the Victoria Festival of Authors an engaging, accessible, and sustainable festival.